Hi, my name is Christy, and this podcast is my pursuit to glean practical wisdom on femininity, homemaking, finances, and relationships from the God-fearing women in my life. Hope you enjoy this journey with me as we learn to smile at the future. Now let's dive right in. Hello, single sisters. Just a reminder that the Smiling at the Future podcast is now on an every other week release schedule. So in case you were wondering why it wasn't being released every week, we made this schedule change to be more consistent and sustainable for the long term. And when I say we, there really is a team that helps me with this podcast, and I would love to give credit where credit is due. And quite honestly, I have the easiest job for this podcast. I simply ask questions. But I have a friend named Andrea Klein who spends hours and hours editing the interviews to make them sound as good as possible. She does have a website if you want to check out her work. And if you have any audio needs, I would direct you to her. Her website is AndreaKleinAudio.com. That's AndreaKline audio.com. And I'll also link that in the show notes for this podcast. She is professional, she's super upbeat, and she never makes me feel like I've inconvenienced her when I come to her with last-minute edits for the podcast. I highly recommend her, and I'm very thankful for her. Also, I have another dear friend named Laura McVicker who has volunteered her time to completely handle the Instagram page for this podcast. She selects the best quotes from the interviews and spends a lot of time creating the posts and turning them into something that is artistically beautiful as well. She was also one of my biggest cheerleaders for this podcast, and she really did help give me the courage to start this podcast. And many of the questions that I'm asking are actually ones that she has thought up herself. She's probably embarrassed that I'm even mentioning her name because she loves serving in the background and avoiding the limelight, but I cannot in good conscience take the credit for her fantastic and professional skills. Laura, I'm so thankful for you. Thank you for your help with this podcast. And I have many other friends and family members who graciously let me talk their ear off about this podcast and who offer topic suggestions, ideas for questions, and more. My brother Nate bought me a brand new top-of-the-line microphone, so that has made a big difference in the audio quality as well. And now that I'm done with my thankfulness rant, let me introduce you to Dawn Harcus. She is a virtuous woman who my family has known for many years, and my dad actually officiated their wedding over 30 years ago. She is a strong woman, but she has also learned to take great delight in submitting to her husband. And today she's going to share the deeper heart issues and attitudes behind femininity and how to steer clear of feminism in your thinking and actions. So here is my conversation with Dawn Harcus. Well, Dawn, I'm so excited for you to join today and to share your wisdom on a topic that affects a lot of women and to give us ways to think through this biblically. But before we jump into the questions I have today, I would love for you to give our listeners a little bit of your background and story and why femininity and feminism is a topic that is really personal and near and dear to your heart.
Yes, well, what a privilege. It's fun to be able to do this with you today. And my name is Dawn Harcus, and I live currently in outside of Chicago in Illinois. And we are here to started a group of churches and called Crossway Chapel. And we just are currently starting one here in Aurora. I grew up in a Christian home. However, I didn't come to a true saving knowledge of the Lord until ninth grade. So I'm married. Let's see, what else can I tell you about myself? I'm married. It'll be 35 years. The gal that's interviewing Christy, her dad, who's gone to be with the Lord, actually officiated our wedding. So we have a special connection. And I have a son who is 31, almost 32. He's been married for 8 years to Sarah. His name is Josh. We did have another son that we lost at age 14. And then we have a daughter who is a junior in high school, 17, Erica. So we adopted her when she was a baby. So we have bookends, 15-year spread. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, I always wanted a lot of children, and the Lord gave me two. However, He has allowed us to have a lot of people live with us. So we figured over our married life, we've had almost 50 people stay with us for more than a month. So mostly young singles. So that's really our love. We have just been with young singles from the time we were married through now. We have currently 3 football players from Aurora University living with us. And it's just a neat privilege to be able to just do life, not perfectly, obviously, we're not perfect, but give them hopefully a perspective on that a home can be joyful and, fun and purposeful. And so with this topic of femininity in the feminist world, I think it probably started out for me just even taking pride in messages from my dear parents that I don't blame them for this, because I think most parents do this. Oh, good job at that. Way to go. Just a lot of pride that took root early on. I'm a firstborn, so that probably explains a lot of it, but kind of driven. And so because of that, I think some of those messages, I just really had probably a lot of confidence in myself. And so some of me coming to faith in Jesus was really learning to, humble myself. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean humiliate myself and put myself down? And he still is working on that with me, because I feel like it's probably till the day I see him, that's something I'll struggle with, where other people may not feel good enough about themselves. I have the other extreme. So many verses come to mind. But anyway, since high school, I had a desire once I came to faith in 9th grade and really surrendered my life to the Lord. I wanted to be in ministry. I thought, oh, maybe if I marry a pastor, that would be, really awesome. So I think this pertains to how feminism sort of creeped into my life. So you've got the pride taking root, and then the desire to be in ministry. I was always put in these leadership positions throughout my life, more of a go-getter. And so I think because of that, in college, I went to a Christian college, and I started to struggle with my role as a woman. I have 2 brothers, grew up mostly, like even in high school, felt like I got along better with guys than I did with girls. And it wasn't until college that I started to really develop I had a couple friends in high school that were neat from church, but in college is when I feel like I developed more female friendships. And even talking to some of them, it was like they dealt with the same thing I did. And I thought that was so interesting that they were struggling too to figure out, what does that look like to be assertive and to be in leadership, and yet you're a woman. And so where are the parameters? So coupled with my pride, I sought out avenues to speak, lead, lots of confusion as far as, when the Bible talks about spiritual gifts, like what does that mean to teach and to equip? And, half the population is women. And so, is it just restricted to women? Can I do that with men if they're younger, same age? And I was put in these situations that some of it I found myself in, and I felt uncomfortable, like whether it was managing a restaurant or that I did in college, or when I was in college, I'd be put an RA, and I'd be with other resident assistants, and asked to kind of lead out in a devotional or do these different things. And I would always feel uncomfortable with that, like if there were men present or guys present, but I couldn't put my finger on why. So I did start to pursue seminary after Bible college. I went to Biola in California. And after Bible college, I thought, well, maybe I do want to be in ministry. I don't think I should be a pastor. I don't think that's right. So I had some sense of like, no, that's not right. But as far as like a high school group, well, the youth leader I was leading with, he kept encouraging me, why don't you teach this? Or, I'm going to be on vacation. Could you lead? And again, I would do it, but I would feel really awkward. But when I was just with the girls, I felt like, because I'm a woman, it makes sense now practically, I'm thinking. And so I came back to the original church that Tom and I were married in out in California. And at that moment, the Lord is so gracious. The college group, the college pastor was doing a series on Titus 2. Now, Titus 2 is written more for married women. However, he felt it necessary for us single women to understand that, these qualities aren't going to be, and we'll get to that later, but they won't be, you won't have them automatically in your life when you get married. So how good of us as single women to start applying these different things. Obviously, there's no husband present, but can you still be hospitable? Can you still open your home? Can you come under, is there authority in your life? Do you have a father still that is, living, or a pastor that you can put yourself under, obviously being careful with that, and that Lord ultimately is your authority, but, learning those qualities ahead of time, which was so timely for me, because while I'm listening to this in this college group, I'm also going to the seminary where I'm seeing these women that a couple of different classes. I just had maybe 3 classes, but one of them was, very militant, angry, bitter. Why can't we be on the mission field like the men? Why can't we do this like the men? And I was so turned off by her, just no joy. There was no joy present. And I took my mom one day and I said, look at this. This is not what I want to be. And she's like, no, you don't, and I think it was kind of affirming that I definitely, this examples I saw really turned me off to, and I know not all women are like this. There's some that I've met that are still very feminine, and yet we may disagree on what the word says about teaching men. However, I think that seeing the God, just that needful input from this college pastor, and was so perfect, like perfect timing of the Lord. And then at that same time, I meet my husband to be, and I didn't know at the time, but he was starting to, as I had these different questions, and he's a very strong leader, which I knew I needed. And at that point was not in full-time ministry, but he was in business, but the Lord was starting to, he was being asked to come on part-time and then full-time, and now he is a pastor. So it's kind of funny how all the things that I had prayed for, the Lord has kind of weaved in. And so at asking him, being a strong leader, I said, I have these different gifts. How do I use them? What's appropriate? And so he really helped me kind of, as just a friend at the time, sort of think through some of that, because we were in a Bible study together, campus Bible study from the church we were part of. And so I was leading different women, and it was just helpful. And he would say, okay, you could submit that in a different way. And we'll get to some of those details, but it's really, really helpful in figuring out, how can I still offer, input and yet not usurp, the leaders that the Lord has present in my life. And it's so, I just have to say, for single women, it's so important that, if the Lord has you married, like, this is something I'm so grateful for, that you kind of get and we've been talking to my daughter about this too, because again, she's a strong one. Of course, I have a strong daughter. It just makes sense, and I thought, okay. And she loves to debate. Like those are some of her skills. And she's even talked about doing law, and which makes me nervous because it's more arguments. But I said, honey, what does that look like for you to submit to a man? And we'll talk about submission too, because I know that's another hot button. But, what does that look like to come under a man and really follow him? Yes, you have wonderful ideas and opinions, and you are needed in that relationship. But so much of it is, and so much of what I learned from your mom, Christy, actually is, what does that look like to submit those to him or appeal to him, in a right way? Just makes the world of difference. They don't hear you if you say it, demanding it, and, dogmatically. So it's, all in the delivery. But anyway, so that's kind of my background.
That is so fun to hear all of that. I didn't know most of that from your story, so thank you for sharing. For the listeners who might be a little confused about the difference between femininity and feminism, can you articulate the differences there?
Sure, I sure can. So feminism, as I looked it up, actually is the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of the equality of the sexes. It's based on basically vying for my rights centered on me. And I know, again, I just want to clarify because I don't want to turn anyone away with this, because the latter part I wrote, but because I see that as for myself, that's what it looked like, and can so subtly sink into, even in the church, where we're, it's about what's important to me and my self-sufficiency. And then even as we're working with men, at different jobs and things, I think a lot of us are in that kind of, how do we view that? So that would be feminism. And it somewhat repels men, honestly. I mean, if that's another kind of added twist to that. But anyway, femininity, I would see as qualities or attributes regarded as characteristic of women. We find our worth and dignity first in the Lord. I think there are women, that have different, you can find different podcasts and all kinds of things, YouTube channels on what femininity is in our culture is different. So there's two different definitions. There's biblical femininity and then cultural femininity. And I lived in the South for a while, and there's a lot of very feminine women that they dress to the hilt. They keep their skin nice, and, they dress in a way that brings attraction. And we could talk about some of this too, but brings attraction to themselves a little bit more, even though they may not purposely be doing that. That's a little bit what they're, trying to appeal. But the biblical femininity is more finding worth and dignity in the Lord, that your sufficiency is in Jesus. It's not in your job or your mothering or your husband or your different successes or things like that, but your worth is found in the Lord. So it makes a difference. There's a different purpose in that, and different emotional, needs. We're treated with care and understanding. I think there's lots of scriptures to talk about that. And we need, in a sense, being feminine certainly speaks to that we need more quantity of emotional intimacy and affection than the men might, but we're centered on Christ and others, and we're drawing people to Jesus by our life. And I think when I look at the Titus 2 qualities, it talks about even how, and we'll get to that passage, but how even us coming under a husband, and I know we're talking more to married here with that, but there's an adorning of the gospel that brings. But even as you as single women, have your confidence in the Lord, and you're able to flourish in who Jesus has made you to be, there's a winsomeness to that, to you, to Jesus. Like, why is she not standing for her rights? Or why is she seems so peaceful about this situation? It just really puts Jesus on display in a huge way. So I think that's that adorning of the gospel. I love that thought of, that we can attract people to, not to ourselves, but in maybe our, outfit or whatever, which is important, but it's more the hidden person, the heart.
Yeah, thank you. I think with feminism, the one definition or one thing that I read was that they confuse equality with sameness. They're saying you have to be exactly the same as a man. And, like when you see women joining the Navy SEALs or, they think that that's a big triumph for feminism. But really what it does, it just frustrates women because, yes, God made them different and they can't do the same things just as well as men. And you brought out how your professors seem to be so angry. And I feel like that's kind of the mood among a lot of feminists. They're very angry. And yeah, I mean, even mostly in this, I'm thinking, secular world.
Yes. No, that's true. Yeah, that's very true. And just to speak to that, I think you're right. There's an aspect of, I know some of the things that as I would read there's a really wonderful resource called Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. It's quite the resource. Get ready for, but it's more written to those that that already have a relationship with Jesus. So like how feminism has infiltrated the church. And, why do women want to be pastors? Why, some of that. So if that appeals to some of your listeners, that might be a really good resource. So another aspect of feminism that I think you touched on is sameness, is what I've seen when I managed a restaurant before I married and things like that, or I teach fitness now. And there's men in my class, or I might have, like in the past, I had young waiters work for me. And so being careful to still be feminine in that, like, I don't change my voice. I say things in more of a feminine way, maybe asking them a question or something like that, versus like I've heard many fitness trainers, I drop down, dude, give me 20. And their voices are, militant, man-like, kind of, jockish. And I can still be me. And so I'm careful, in those kind of settings. So I think feminism, you're right, with that sameness, there's almost a change of, you feel like you have to say it in more of a direct way and, so have a little bite to it.
Are there any verses that you would like to point our listeners to on what God thinks of femininity?
Sure. There's quite a few, actually, but I think just to narrow it down, I thought of predominantly, since most of your audience are single women, is thinking like Genesis 2 to start off, that we were made male and female, that we're made differently. But I love how later, and I'm trying to remember here, in 1 Timothy 2, that's where it is, where it talks about women aren't to exercise or have authority over, teach or exercise authority over men. And this is a very strategic verse for me personally, because I know you'll hear people say, well, we as women back in Bible times weren't learned, like they weren't learned. They didn't have opportunity. They had to stand at the outside of the synagogue or around the synagogue, and they could hear, but they couldn't speak. And so you see a lot of verses talking about, women not, speaking or things like that. And so because of that, people would say, well, that's why it says that women weren't to teach or exercise authority over men. However, at the very last part, I think it's verse 15, it says, but God created Adam before Eve. And so regardless of culture, regardless of your situation, we've been created female. And so it goes back to the created order that God set up. And I've just seen it as such a beautiful thing. In the past, I thought of it as like, well, I get it. And I think maybe for that type of woman that's a little more docile and a little more submissive by nature, that's great for them. But what about me? What about somebody that's strong like me? And maybe there's some of your listeners are feeling that too. What does that look like to be true to who God has made us to be and yet go with that created order? And so that was really encouraging to me to see, that so regardless of your situation, culture, it's that's what he desires for the man to lead and the woman to follow. And we can get into what does that look like for singles, because that's tricky, And then Titus 2, I love just what I shared about in my testimony of how there's just so many neat qualities of, being women are to be pure, they're to be trustworthy, they're to love children, do you, provide time in your life to stop and talk to a child, or do you, help babysit, your friends that are having little ones and things like that, or in coming under authority. I think probably that was the toughest one for me, even though I have a strong dad and I did want to honor him. I think there's still just subtly this, like, we're told as women in our culture, like, you don't need a man, you can just go, even in the church, there's this feeling of this self-sufficiency, you can be your own boss and all of that. And how subtly that's infiltrating. And the beautiful thing of authority, I see it as like an umbrella, of protection from the storm and the different things in life that can hit us, and how wonderful to have, as I said before, have a father or someone, maybe a surrogate father that, can kind of protect you, in the midst of, or maybe a pastor too, that you can go to and seek advice and things like that. Also, Titus 2 talks about keeping the home in order. How many of you have really messy? We've had girls live here that have messy rooms and they can't find their homework or their whatever. And it's just, and just things are kind of, and so as, if the Lord were to have you marry, you add to that, now have a husband, you now have potentially children, and you're having people over, and not that it's we can get fanatical the other way too, where it's every nook and cranny is swept, but is your home a place where you can have people over and not be like, oh shoot, they're coming over, and open that closet and throw it all in, and I think we all have a junk drawer, so that's a given. But but what does that look like? Not only just taking care of the things that the Lord has given us, as he said in Genesis, even of the, having dominion over our world, it's a sense of do you have dominion over your room? How is that? What's that looking like lately? Are there sinks, dishes piling up in the sink, right?
This is a topic that is so close to my heart. And I think, there's people that are more prone to tidiness than others, but it is something you can grow in it. Don't write yourself off if you feel like, oh, I'm just not that person. I'm, just a messy person by nature. Don't give yourself that out. But God's a God of order. It's a way that we can reflect that about him. And let me tell you, if you can do that for a husband and make your home a place of order and ease, and a place he wants to come home to, that is such a gift that you can give a future husband if the Lord has marriage for you. And if not, then give it as a gift to the people that you're inviting in and being hospitable to.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And I think and it talks about being hospitable as well. And so that keeping your home in order kind of can just lead to the other one, where you're not having to run around like a crazy person right before somebody comes over, but there's a peacefulness, and that leads into 1 Peter 3, another one of my favorite passages. I am going to read this one because it's so good. but it does talk about women, wives initially coming under husbands, but verse 3, it says, your adornment, and this is for single as well, must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. And that talks about the holy women hoping in the Lord and basically doing what is right without fear. So I think of, especially during this COVID time, oh my goodness, talk about hoping in the Lord and doing what is right without fear. That so pertains to right now. And I think this was such a confusing verse for me because, again, I'm not quiet. And I was trying to figure out, what in the world does that mean? It's basically saying you're not focusing on the external. Certainly we can put a little eyeliner on and things like that, right? And that's fun. It's fun to be feminine and it's fun to paint our nails and things like that. I don't think he's saying not to do that, but we can, and this is where that biblical femininity versus cultural feminine or, society, worldly femininity can be different, is that there's so many tutorials on how to do the right eyebrows, right? And so, you've got all this, and it's very feminine for sure, but you can be so focused on the external. And this is saying not merely external, but really focusing on the quality of the heart. And so it says gentle and quiet, and gentle there. I just did a word study a number of years ago because I was really struggling with this. And gentle means that there's a humility. You're willing to put others before you. And peace, the quiet was such a cool word. It was basically, there's an unrattled tranquility. Like you're not disturbed. That's what it was. You're not disturbed by the disturbances of others or circumstances. And I love that. Like when Jesus had his head on the pillow I just imagine him having a pillow on the boat. It doesn't say that in the scriptures, but he's on the boat and the boat is tossing to and fro and the disciples are all upset. And he basically says, peace, be still. It's that kind of, like, he wasn't rattled. He was able to rest peacefully. He was asleep when this was happening. And I think of, wow, that's what it is when you hope in the Lord. And, it's this, I know I'm not supposed to expound on these verses, but it's just so good. I just love that. And then you don't have this fear and anxiety because, God has everything at hand. So I love that. That's what he wants us to focus on. And of course, Proverbs 31, I have to throw that one in there because I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's not a true woman. And it's basically a father giving his son advice as to what to look for. But boy, if we were to, take that to heart, which your mom so willingly shared with me, what that looks like. I mean, that's a woman who's industrious. She's about the tasks of the day. She's not lazy. It's not so much what she's doing too, but it's also who she is, that she's trustworthy. Her words are, measured. And I just think there's so much we can glean as a single woman, from, I know it's talking about married, but because the heart of her husband trusted her, but ultimately charm is deceitful. So that worldly femininity is all about the charm, right? And saying it in a certain way and walking a certain way with those heels on, stilettos on or whatever. But is it the, the woman that's praised is the one that fears him? And so I think there's so much there about that. And then the last verse, and again, there's oodles more, is 1 Timothy 2:9-10 talks about basically the dressing modestly, that we can be a testimony to our brothers in Christ by just being careful. We can't control because I'm sure they could lust after us, even if we had a burlap sack on up to our neck, but still we can be, honoring to them by just choosing to, be careful how low, how high, and how tight, all of that.
So glad that you brought Proverbs 31 in because, this podcast, the name came from a verse in Proverbs 31. But I don't know if you've ever heard this. I've heard it said that the Proverbs 31 woman, it's basically a passage encapsulating a whole lifetime. So it's not a woman who's doing.
Yes, I heard that from your mom, actually. She's the one that shared that.
Oh, really? So don't think that this is all happening in one day or one week. It'd be an impossible standard for any woman to try and meet. But yeah, a lifetime of faithfulness. And that's what you see in the Proverbs 31 woman. So different seasons, you'll be able to do different things that she does. I think that was a real encouragement for me to be like, okay, I'm not falling as far behind as I thought.
Because they grow up, children rise to bless her. And I thought, okay, so it is over. Yeah, that made sense.
Well, thank you for sharing all those verses. Those were all excellent. And I know you said you had many more that you could share, but we'll stop there. So my next question is, can you give examples of what a misuse of our femininity might look like?
Yeah, and we alluded to this a little bit already, but I think the dressing immodestly, the contrast to what we talked about in First Timothy, tight clothes, accentuating your curves, showing cleavage, and having a daughter, it's tough to find a nice dress that doesn't go way up the slit, way up to showing the thigh. And, so just, I think that it's more about the heart, not so much like, I need to fix this here. And, but really asking yourself, why do you want to wear that? Why are you trying to draw attention to yourself, your looks, rather than others? And that can be in lots of makeup, versus just highlighting, a lot of perfume, flashy clothes, and just being appropriate for your age and your surrounding. And then using your appeal, I think this would be probably, just a worldly way, but using your appeal to get what you want. So that feminine wiles, you've probably heard that term, but just kind of manipulating to have your needs met. You hear it all the time of, secretaries that, they want to rise up in the company, or a woman that wants to rise up, how does she use her femininity in a wrong way to get ahead? So whether it's sleeping around or, whatever. And that kind of goes with the last one, is enticing or seducing men by lust. And, seeing how many guys you can get even to check you out, and I remember a friend of mine, she was very pretty, and she's a believer now, but when she said after she came to faith, she said, I used to love it when guys would whistle at me as I walked down the street. It's like that kind of, like, how much do we allow our flesh to feed on, even as Christian women, to feed on that kind of affirmation, but it's more of our externals, not so much the heart. So it seems like it's a lot on the external.
Another point that I was thinking about here is using our emotions to manipulate, to crying, whining, pouting, using those things to get what we want. So yeah, never resort to an emotional advantage, especially in dealing with men. Be as objective as you can if you are making a request, but don't prey on them with your emotions.
Yeah, that's so good, because I remember early marriage, I didn't even realize I was doing that, but I guess I did. And my husband, bless his heart, just sat me down. He's like, you can't go off crying because we can't, and I didn't realize I was manipulating through, like, as he explained it to me, I thought, he's so right. Maybe I was having trouble thinking of how to put it in words because it was emotional. I was emotionally charged at the time. Instead of saying, can I have 5 minutes to just sort of calm down, and just sort of let my emotions settle, because I'm feeling like I might say something I'll regret. Instead of doing that, I started crying, like, I can't talk right now. And I went up, and I thought, that it's exactly what you said. That's exactly how he read it. other men may not. They may, say, "Oh, honey," mine no. So, which I needed somebody that'll be like, you know what that communicates to me? That you want to stop this conversation and you're controlling this situation right now. So anyway, that's very good. Very good.
Is there an area of femininity that you think is overlooked or neglected by Christian ladies, single women? Just one thing you want to bring to the light?
Yes, I have 4, but they're quick. One of them is esteeming feminine qualities over having to be self-sufficient. I think that we've kind of talked about that already, but not being afraid to be gentle, to be weak. And I probably have to clarify what weak means, but that there's a delicacy to you, a modesty. And I think just that, weakness, not that, and I know we're so encouraged to be strong, you've got this, just suck it up. And kind of this, I don't know, I feel that temptation in different times, but to be, I think, weak in terms of like being vulnerable, that where I can say to, like, you could share with your brother Nathan, right? Like I'm feeling I'm struggling right now. Maybe there's a vulnerability, appropriate vulnerability. You're not doing it to every man, but like me for my husband, like I'm feeling tempted right now, or I'm feeling, just vulnerable in this area. And so it shows my weakness, but we know that in our weakness, when we're weak, he's strong. And so I think just not being afraid to esteem those feminine qualities. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm being clear. And I think maybe an area, and I see this with a lot of women, is, we could get the door. Yes, we could carry the heavy, because we all do CrossFit now, right? No, but, we could do all these things, but, just taking the time to allow the men to be men and like, could you carry this for me? Or, just allowing, I think in that way you're not only showing your femininity, but you're also promoting their masculinity, to rise up and take that step. And, I think that's where the delicacy and the weakness can play in. And it's really good. It's a neat thing. Versus, I got this, I'm good, I'm okay, I'm in control, kind of a attitude. And that's very subtle too. I've done that myself even yesterday, I think. So it's, so just allowing people to help you.
Yeah, my mom is so good at that. She'll go to the grocery store and she won't be able to reach something on a shelf, or something will be a little heavier than she can lift, and she'll walk around and find a gentleman at the store and she'll say, "Can I borrow your muscles?" And then, usually the men are just so eager to help, and then she compliments them and they just walk out of that aisle with chest high.
Yeah. And I think as moms with boys, I let my sons do a lot of that, and it's so fun because they've got these little tweedling arms, at different stages of their life. And yet, boy, they feel like they've got huge guns, because you've just had them help you, do whatever, or figure something out. My son is very technical, and I just chuckle because, and I'm not to say that we contribute to that because the Lord put that in him, but he had a lot of avenues with us because we could not figure out this chord goes to this, and he knew, but to allow him to kind of expand, his masculinity that way. So.
Yeah. And, of course, I think you would say too, don't take advantage where you're making them do everything, but there's certain moments when it is appropriate, and it'll show, even a certain level of respect too.
Yeah, I think so too. I think this one is something I wish I had learned of earlier. It was probably once we were working with different college students and I was already married, but I knew the principle, but guarding your heart above all else, Proverbs 4:23. But this is where it was tricky. I knew, like, physically we shouldn't defraud one another. You see that in 1 Thessalonians 4, but the emotional defraud. So guarding your heart emotionally towards a brother in Christ, I think is probably something that's not shared about much. And funny things that we do as women, he walks you from the church to your car, and we've already got, we might have feelings towards him already because we admire him. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, Dawn Harcus, that sounds so good, together. And you're writing your name with, I'm trivializing it, but it's true. We play it way forward when it's actually way back here, and it's a brother in Christ. So it's truly a brother, and so
I think especially if you have your eye on somebody, and just like if you're looking to buy a particular type of car, all of a sudden you're very acutely aware of every car on the freeway, and you notice that car everywhere, and you're just hypersensitive to that. And I think if you're starting to set your affections on a particular person, that can be easy to do as well. You're hypersensitive to every look and glance and gesture, and it's so easy to read more into those than are actually there. So yeah, with my interview with Janice Johnson, she talked about just how to know if a guy likes you, and it needs to be a verbal communication, not a nonverbal body language thing. Girls are very, very into nonverbal cues, and we read between the lines. We're just very sensitive and aware of that, and guys aren't. And so communication has to be clear.
And then the third one I have is good works making a claim to godliness. That I see a lot of single women doing this here with where we are, and but helping, caring for others, opening their home. I don't know if many singles might feel, I've met married women that feel this way too, but feel like they can do this now. Like they might say, oh, my apartment's too small, or I don't have the means, but just it's more of and this is something, again, your mom taught me, but I would come over to your home. I don't think you were born yet, but I would come over I think we were engaged, and your mom was spending time with me, and her wedding gift to me was giving me cooking classes. I don't know if she ever told you that, which was very needed. Thank you, Judy. But the one thing I really appreciated is she said, you don't really need to put out all this amazing food, but you could just have tea and toast. Like it just can be so simple. It's about them and getting together with them and ministering to them and being hospitable to them. And I really appreciate that. So it doesn't matter how small your place is. You could even go for a walk if you felt like it was too small to even put another chair in. But most people don't worry about that. And so just thinking about what are things, because I am, and this is something we share a lot with our singles here, is, that 1 Corinthians 7, that I have time. I mean, you don't think you have time, you're working a full-time job and all that, but because you don't have a husband right now and children, your time is your own in a sense. Like you can just, obviously your employer would differ with you on that one, but you know what I'm saying? Like your evenings are free, most likely, your mornings are free, your weekends are free. And I know ministry hopefully you're really involved in ministry and giving your life away, but it's a unique time in that you don't have the distractions, the good distractions of a husband and children that can, you're able to use your time to minister to others. And it's this doing so with motive to please the Lord. It's not about, oh, come look at my house and my new apartment and the things I have, but it's really, so I think that good works. It's just a really neat thing that you can do now. And then the last one is learning from older women, just making sure you have women in your life that are speaking, whether it's a mom and it can be an unsaved mom too, that she's, you're just willing to come under and learn and grow and their wisdom that life has given them, whether they're saved or not.
Yeah. Going back to your points on hospitality too, I think so important for single women because we can be very self-absorbed. I don't know. I know whenever you extend that warmth and invitation to somebody else and you invest in somebody else and then taking the focus off of you, it blesses you more than it does them. At least I know in my experience, it's come away feeling so thankful and uplifted when you're encouraging somebody else and you're in the process preaching truth to yourself. Yeah, it's so helpful to get out of your room and out of your head and out of your circumstances and lift somebody else up.
I have to give a quick shout out to these girls that are part of our ministry. They're college age, and they have a girls' house about, I don't know, 5 streets away from our home. And some of them lived with us, about 3 of them lived with us. But what I love about how they're practically doing this, the good works, is they all chip in a certain amount of money. And that's money used for snacks for hospitality. And I just thought that was such a practical way. So if you have roommates and, you can, have a certain person in charge of kind of, they designated certain responsibilities to each girl in the house, that one collects the rent and all that. But I thought that was really a neat way just to, right from the start, like, we're going to put this aside for fun snacks to get for people that come over and drinks and things. So anyway.
Oh, that's really special. Very practical. Okay, the last question on my list today is, how can single ladies encourage each other to be more feminine?
Good question. I love this question. I think that the one thing is, I know here what we're seeing and with the breakdown of the home, and I think, that culture is so adamant about blurring the gender lines that the farther away from God's plan we get, it's confusing. Like what, and then even growing up in homes where a lot of them don't have dads, or there's a lot of divorce and things like that. They don't even know what it looks like to be a woman, or maybe their mom is busy, and whether it's working full time or she's involved in all these different committees and things. It just seems like there's lacks of examples. I think even encouraging. I know something that was really neat again with that girls' house is that one of the girls really has a desire to live with a Christian family. Well, that meant that they would lose her rent. Like she's going to fulfill her year, but they were hoping to do another year lease. And we're kind of counting on her, in their minds, not monetarily, but. And she said, I really feel like, because of my home situation, I would love to, if the Lord has me get married, I'd love to, or just even to see an example of a Christian home. And so even that, they were so affirming. They said, yeah, you should do that. And I thought just encouraging each other that way is, a blessing to get, counsel from others. I think for sure, this might be obvious, but praying for one another, if there's areas of, one of them struggles with, being a little more militant or being a little more direct, or I think that's, just being able to pray for each other, know where we're tempted to not be feminine. And then I know another area we've seen throughout our ministry with singles is just some women don't have, because of the lack of role models in their life, they may dress more masculine, and they might play sports. And so that kind of plays into, well, I don't really need to do my hair. I just put a ball cap on and I can wear these sweats, there's, sniff test. Oh, they're still good, kind of thing. And so for the other girls to come around them and, encourage, we've tried to do that here where we'll have like a nail night or, hair night or something, and just fun feminine things that kind of can encourage, and even asking them, like, I know it seems very personal, but like, I noticed we've done that with them, is there something that you don't like about being a woman that, maybe probing one another, that you could kind of encourage that way. And I think part of that is just sharing ideas of, maybe how, like, I could come to someone and share with you, ways I want to please the Lord. And that could be, being more peaceful, when situations are, so there's encouraging that way as we share. I think helping each other use our gifts, like I shared about, if there's leadership, situation, let's say I'm serving in a ministry, and this has come up many times, and the gals are a little more, they've got the ideas and they're a little more assertive, and then they're under this guy that's just like, come on, lead, like we're, we're ready to go, and you're kind of not sure, and, sort of waffling. Like, how can you bring those ideas? As much like coming alongside a husband too, that he doesn't feel, lambasted and just sort of squashed by the women, but he's emboldened in his masculinity, but also you're contributing to that ministry by bringing those thoughts or whatever. And so when we talked about like bringing it in terms of a question, have you thought about this? Or, those are very, because he can decide, no, I haven't. Thank you very much. I'm good. Or he could say, oh, that's really good. And just putting it in terms of a question is really a great way to submit ideas. Or is this a good time? You could sense he's, maybe feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility. Is this a good time to bring some thoughts? I think being teachable, we talked about asking questions, learning, showing humility. I think we can encourage, even amongst each other, how do we receive constructive criticism from each other? Is it like, no, you don't know me, I'm just this way? Or are we willing to, embrace and pray about what somebody has shared because they love us? We know the motive is, even though we don't like what they say, the motive is a heart, that cares for us. And so you're kind of wondering what that whole relationship looks like. But I think what's beautiful about coming to know the Lord is basically he just wants our faith. He wants us to trust him and to know that he has all things at hand. And so in that, we can be peaceful as women. We can be fully embracing our femininity because that's who he's created us to be. And in that, you're going to have such fulfillment in life. I mean, we don't have time, but just the way the Lord has blessed my life because of, those kind of hard choices at times, and just such a blessing. So to know that you will not miss out, that he knows who he's made, he knows you, so you can trust in his wise, gracious hand.
And I love how you brought it back to God is our creator, and he knows the best way for you to live life. And he set the family up this way. He set the genders up this way. And he knows what's best and what's most harmonious. And when you walk faithfully in what he has, the plan he has laid out, he will bless you and bless that. So we're not, God didn't come on the scene after the fact and give us some rules. Like he designed all of this, and for a good purpose, and for us to showcase the gospel, and just between the men and women, we can recognize and embrace our differences without fearing any loss of dignity and value. So just going back to where we're equal in the sight of God, but we have different roles. And I just wanted to share this quick example because it really stuck in my mind that, you can have a rolling pin and you can have a measuring cup, and not, they're equal in, I guess, value, but they have different roles, different functions, and how women and men are like that. We're equal in the sight of God. We just have different functions, and knowing what those are, knowing how to lean into those and not feel that you have to do everything that a man does, and that means equality. That's not equality. You will be frustrated and angry if you try to live that way. And that's why so many feminists are so angry.
And I hope people don't misunderstand. It doesn't mean you're not confident and assertive, but it's just all in how you go about it, because I think, he's made some of us like that. But what's your assertiveness for? What is it for you and to, get ahead, or is it for the gospel? Like I'm assertive with people because I want them to know Jesus. I want them to have life and abundant life and really be fulfilled and have a way, to take their sin and their guilt and all of that. And so it can be projected different ways, and really a beautiful thing that how the Lord's made you. And so not to, because I tried to be I tried to be submissive like your mom, and the pendulum would swing from one side to another, trying to figure out, like, who am I? Who has the Lord made me to be? I have different, and that you are a blessing in using those gifts. You're a blessing to that family, to that ministry, to that job, because of how God's uniquely crafted you. So not to feel like you have to fit a mold, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that because it looks different, and so I think it's neat. It's just some freedom that way.
Yeah. And I loved how you brought out humility too. I think a lot of it comes back to that. You're not doing it for prideful reasons, but you're humble and using your gifts for the Lord. And so, yeah, I think people can definitely tell the difference there. All right. Well, Dawn, so appreciate you and for sharing your life wisdom and what you've learned through the years. And there's so many other questions that we could probably have gotten to, but we'll just maybe do a part 2 in the future. But yeah, definitely appreciate you and how you love God and His Word. And that really came through our conversation today.